Hello and welcome to Dollars and Cents, the Australia Institute podcast where we're talking about just what the hell is going on in the economy. I'm Elinor Johnston-Leake, the senior content producer here at the Australia Institute, and our chief economist Greg Jericho is away this week, so today I'll be talking to our senior economist, Matt Grudnoff. Hello, Matt.
G'day, Elinor.
Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
So, Matt, gambling reform is in the news.
The status quo regarding the saturation of gambling advertising, particularly where children are exposed to it, is untenable.
The Prime Minister is under pressure to enact a total ban on gambling advertising.
Today, raising concerns that a push for a complete ban will end free-to-air broadcasting and damage sporting codes.
There is no reason for gambling to be on TV or on ads. The only reason these major parties don't want to upset them is because there's an election coming on.
This government is scared stiff of the media companies, of the gambling companies and the major sporting codes.
This is about stopping the inundation, the total saturation of online and off TV, of advertising. As a country that loses the most per capita in the world, $25 billion a year, that is terrifying that young people now just think, well, that's normal. That's what you do in life. Behind there lies lives ruined, families that have been torn apart, young men who have committed suicide because of the hole that they have got themselves into with gambling addictions. This is something we have to tackle.
Both Labor and the Coalition are proposing some reforms to gambling advertising. A parliamentary committee proposed a total ban on gambling ads. The Labor Party is proposing banning gambling ads during children's programming, during live sports broadcasts, and also on an hour either side, limited to 2 ads an hour at other times. The Coalition has a similar plan, but without the 2 per hour limit. Matt, is the idea of banning gambling ads on TV popular in Australia?
Yeah, well, as you can guess, since both parties want to do it, yes, it is.
Not very often that happens.
No, it is not very often. And what's amazing is how much people hate gambling ads.
How much do people hate gambling ads?
People hate gambling ads a lot. Even people who gamble hate gambling ads. The Australia Institute did some polling in 2022 that found that about 70% of people wanted all gambling ads banned. And
wow,
just to make
extreme.
that clear,
yeah.
About 70% of people also gamble once a year, right? So there are lots of people who gamble who don't want gambling ads. So these are really, really hated ads. People feel that they're bombarded by them all the time. They're concerned that kids know the odds on, the game they're watching. And there's a real groundswell of support to have these ads banned.
And is that across all demographics?
Yeah, so whether you're old or young, male or female, or who you vote for. Coalition voters, more than 65% of coalition voters want ads banned.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter who you vote for, which is why all the major political parties want to do something about it.
So if that explains sort of why both parties have policies around this, why is it that neither party is proposing a total ban? So Bill Shorten claimed that full ban would put the free-to-air TV broadcasters in diabolical trouble.
Free-to-air media is under massive attack by Facebook. It's been completely disrupted by the internet. We've got ourselves in this wicked situation where now some of the free-to-air media need gambling ad revenue at any time in order just to stay afloat.
Would banning TV advertising end free-to-air TV? Do they rely on the money that much?
All these kind of reasons, I'm just old enough to remember back in the very early 90s when they banned cigarette advertising. And all of these reasons were given then.
Yep.
That, sporting codes wouldn't be able to run because they'd lose all the sponsorship, that TV broadcasts would be massively impacted financially. And we're seeing those same excuses now. Of course, the difference is when they banned cigarette advertising, sport continued.
Yeah.
TV continued. And so, no, I don't think that, free-to-air TV will collapse and we will no longer have sporting codes in this country if you were to ban gambling ads. I think that they would be replaced by other advertisers as they were last time.
The early 90s is a bit early for me to remember before I gained consciousness, really. Was tobacco that big in advertising for sport?
Yeah, absolutely. They sponsored all of the big sporting. I mean, just like gambling today, they had a lot of money. They had let's say they had consumers that were very hooked on what they wanted.
Yep,
and
for
they were making
chemical reasons.
lots and lots of money from that, big profits, and they were putting those profits into advertising in order to try and get more consumers in exactly the same way that gambling ads are doing that today. And so will they collapse? Well, I mean, things are slightly different today. Free-to-air television back in the early 90s had a lot more advertising choices. Online, particularly social media and Google and things like that, have taken away a lot of their revenue stream. But still, I mean, gambling ads are just one part of that. Yes, they'll have to hustle up some other people to advertise, but there are plenty of people out there who are willing to advertise because, TV and particularly sporting codes still get eyeballs, and that's what advertisers want.
And there are plenty of other vices that they can advertise to, I guess.
That's exactly right.
Some people are questioning banning gambling ads. Gambling's legal. They're labeling this some kind of nanny state solution. Are they right about this?
Yeah. You hear this a lot. It's a legal product, so why should we ban advertising on it? Well, we restrict all kinds of legal products. Cigarette advertising, as we've just discussed, that's a legal product. But, there are products that we restrict. If you're too young, you can't buy cigarettes, you can't buy alcohol. There are all kinds of restrictions that we have. And we do it for products that are legal, but they cause harm.
Yeah.
And that's the real issue here. And I think that we've well and truly established that gambling can cause harm. And that's why we have restrictions on it. As a 12-year-old, you can't go out and gamble.
Yeah.
Right? If this product was completely harmless, why would we have that restriction in place? I think that society is allowed to ban things that it think is causing harm, or at least put restrictions on it. And to be clear, at the moment, we're not having a debate about whether we should ban gambling. Nobody has put forward a ban on gambling. What they've put forward is a ban on gambling advertising. And that's a big difference. And society as a whole clearly wants this to happen.
So is it just gambling companies and sort of free-to-air TV broadcasters that are arguing against the ban, or is it anyone else?
Yeah, I think that the big sporting codes in particular are not in favour of this. The current chair of the NRL called rugby league wagering content. He basically said it was a form of entertainment that you could bet on.
That's a great quote from someone representing the sport, I guess.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a lot of the sports codes, or some of them, I should say, some of the sports codes have embraced gambling and make a lot of money from it. And so really it's the people who are making money off this advertising that are most interested in keeping it around.
That's not really surprising, is it?
No, it's not.
No.
I mean, I'm an economist, right?
Yeah.
You look for motives.
More money equals more gambling ads.
Yeah, and money is a great motivator.
Yeah. So what if there aren't any more vices to advertise to? What if TV can't replace these ads? How will free-to-air TV get funding then?
If we're concerned about the funding of free-to-air and particularly news, then maybe we should attack the problem where it is. So the reason that free-to-air TV is struggling at the moment, and the reason that news more generally is struggling at the moment, is because all of the advertising revenue that used to fund it has been taken away by social media, Google, places like that.
Yeah.
If that's the problem, then maybe we should just tax Google and social media. Speaking of things that would probably be insanely popular, that's probably another thing.
Is that something that can be done?
Well, absolutely. So we have a special big bank levy. Basically, the four big banks plus Macquarie are the only banks captured by it, and they pay an additional tax called the bank levy because the government decided that they were a great form of revenue and they wanted to take revenue from them. Very good at making profits are banks.
Yep.
If we want to fund news, then we could simply tax or put a levy on the big social media companies, and we could use that money to fund news rather than going through the idea that, we have to advertise to problem gamblers and extract money from people that way. We could simply go to the source and put a levy on social media. And to be clear, social media clearly has harms as well. I think we've well and truly established that there are problematic aspects to social media.
Yeah.
So taxing that would not be problematic. They are insanely profitable, much like gambling companies and cigarette companies before. And so, we could tax these companies quite happily and use that money for a public good.
It does seem like it would be more popular to get money from these social media giants rather than, people who are spending their last paycheck on sports bet.
Exactly right. And, people might argue, well, Facebook will just say, if you tax us, we just will block access to Australia.
Wasn't there something of a standoff recently between Facebook and the Australian government?
Yeah, they did. So they wouldn't let them put news on their site, but they didn't ban them altogether. They didn't block all of Australia. And the reason for that is if you're Mark Zuckerberg and you're the head of Facebook and the Australian government comes along and says, well, we're going to tax you an extra $1 billion, say. Yep. We'll just make up some numbers. And you're making $5 billion from advertising in Australia. Now, you've got two options. You can say, well, bugger that. I'm going to block Australia altogether and you'll lose $5 billion because you will no longer have those eyeballs and advertisers in Australia will not want to advertise with you.
Yeah.
Or you can pay $1 billion more to the government and be really grumpy about it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not an economist, but that seems like a fairly simple equation.
Yeah, if you've got to go to your board later as Mark Zuckerberg and say, oh, I threw away $5 billion because I wasn't happy paying an extra $1 billion. That doesn't make any economic sense. Will Facebook and the other social media companies absolutely claim that they will consider blocking Australia and leaving? Yes, they will. But, the reality is, so long as we're a rich country with lots of people who are willing to buy stuff and advertisers super keen to sell them stuff, then these companies will stay in Australia because it's profitable to do so.
So, Matt, now for something completely different. The CBA, the Commonwealth Bank, has announced a full-year profit of $9.8 billion this year. Matt, if the economy is slowing down, how can they be making such a big profit?
Yeah, speaking of people doing well, the CBA's profit is down ever so slightly, down by 2%. But look, compared to how much the economy is slowed, this is a really great profit. And the reason is, who would have thought that higher interest rates benefit banks?
Yeah.
And interest rates have gone up. Admittedly, house prices have slowed down. So the other way that big banks benefit is when house prices go up. They basically get most of their revenue from mortgages. It's the biggest source of revenue they have. And they're doing really, really well at the moment. $9.8 billion for the full year, a huge profit, on the back of higher interest rates.
Yeah, that's good for them. On the flip side of that, the Australian Institute has released some research this week that shows that inequality is getting worse. Matt, can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so one of our great economists, David Richardson, has done this fantastic report on inequality, and it's looked at the share of wealth held by the richest 200 families, basically, in Australia, the Rich 200 list. Now, to give you an idea, that's not the top 1%, that's not the top 0.1%, that's actually the top 0.002%. Now, that's such a small number, it's difficult to think about. So it's actually 1 in 50,000 households.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're talking about a tiny proportion. And the amount of wealth they have has grown from 8.4% of GDP about 20 years ago to 23.7% of GDP this year.
From 8.4% to 23.7% over 20 years.
Yes.
Yeah, more than doubled.
Tripled. Yeah. Almost tripled. So they have done fantastically well over the last 20 years. And what it shows is that wealth inequality is getting worse in Australia, not better.
So what's driven this huge jump?
Well, you might think that they earn a lot of money. We often think that rich people must earn a lot of money, and they do, but they don't earn it in the way that most people earn it. Most people earn money through wages, right? Or even profit from owning businesses. But actually, the huge increase in the way that the rich are getting richer is actually through capital gains. So capital gains is when you buy an asset for one price and you sell it for more. And the difference between that is a capital gain. So if you buy a house, say, for $500,000 and then later you sell it for $1 million, you've made a $500,000 capital gain.
Yeah.
That is actually how increasingly wealthy people are making money. In fact, capital gain has become so important that just recently, capital gain was larger than all of the wages. So if you add all of the wages up in Australia that people earned, the amount of capital gain was bigger than that.
Wow. Wow.
Exactly.
That's insane.
And the problem with this is, in an economic sense, that's actually a really unhelpful way to earn income. Because if you go out and you work, you produce stuff, your labor is used to make stuff. If you run a business and it's profitable, running a business makes stuff and, you make consumers happy. But a capital gain doesn't make anything. You're just buying something and then selling it, that same thing, for more later. And so this is what we call unearned income, which basically means that you didn't actually put any effort, or you didn't make anything, or you didn't expand the economy in earning this income. So therefore, in economics, we actually think that this form of income is an income that you should tax more and discourage. And running a business and working and creating things is actually something we should encourage.
But these aren't exactly the type of people that are going to attract criticism for being unproductive members of society.
Well, yeah, but we probably should. But the problem with the current tax system, which is actually making inequality much, much worse, is rather than tax capital gains more than we do, say, labour, we actually tax them less. Capital gains is the most lightly taxed form of income that we have. If you earn income from a capital gain, you halve the amount of tax that you pay if you earn that same income from, say, a wage.
Yeah.
And so this, because capital gains have become so important for wealthy people in accumulating income, that actually means that the tax system is making this inequality worse. Rather than even just taxing it the same as wages, we're actually taxing it more lightly.
So really just the complete opposite of what we should be doing. So what's the reasoning behind this? Whose idea was this?
Well, it came into effect under the Howard government in 1999.
Yeah.
It's called the capital gains tax discount. It's actually one of the reasons we have such an unaffordable housing. So it's not just stuffing up inequality, it's also stuffing up the housing market. And we talked about this before. The reason it came in is because rich people make a lot of money from capital gains, right?
Yeah.
And rich people have power. And so this is why we're taxing this form of income more lightly than others. Think about it. If we taxed capital gains not just the same as income, but even more heavily than income, the way economists suggest, we could actually lower taxes on other things. We could lower taxes on things that we do want to encourage, like working.
That sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah, exactly right. And not only would that be economically better, but it would reduce inequality, because then those at the top that are making so much money out of these capital gains would be paying more tax, whereas at the moment they're actually avoiding paying tax. So you might know that, big CEOs often get a lot of their income through these kind of bonuses through share swaps and things like that. And most people probably don't have any idea about what that means. But what it actually means is they get some of their income being given shares that are worth more than what they're valued at. The upshot of that is that a lot of their income then comes as capital gains. Now, the reason they want that as capital gains is because it's taxed more lightly.
Gosh.
But what it means is that we have this kind of loophole in the tax system that economics suggests we should be taxing at a higher rate, and we're actually taxing at this really low rate, which is making inequality worse.
So if we were to tax these capital gains higher, how many people would that affect in Australia?
Yeah, so the paper kind of has this suggestion. It kind of suggests that what we need are three solutions: that we should tax capital gains properly, that we should tax wealth every year. So a lot of countries have what's called a wealth tax, which means once a year, for particularly rich people, they work out how much stuff they own, how much wealth they have, and they tax them at a certain percentage. So the paper suggests a 2% tax on people with more than $3 million in wealth.
Yeah, so well-off people.
Yeah, and that would raise billions and billions of dollars. And the other thing is a tax on wealth transfers. Now, what does that mean? That's inheritance taxes. So, and again, you wouldn't have it affect everybody. You'd have like a nice high threshold, so you're only impacting a small group of people. One of the advantages, and there aren't many, but one of the advantages of inequality is that it only affects a small number of people if you want to hit the very top.
I suppose that is one way of looking at it.
And you get a lot of money because they have a lot of money. If we set the threshold at 3 million, that would actually only impact 1 in 20 households.
Yeah, and that would then probably benefit a larger percentage.
Yeah,
of the
look, if we put them
population.
into government services or we lower taxes, it would benefit most households.
Well, that's probably all we've got time for today, Matt. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for chatting with me again.
This episode was recorded on Thursday, the 15th of August, and things may have changed since recording. If you'd like to see more of our research, you can go to australiainstitute.org.au. You can also find us on Twitter at the Oz Institute. Matt is at Matt Grudnoff, and I am at Elinor J_L. And we'd love to hear your feedback on the podcast. So if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please send them through to podcasts@australiainstitute.org.au. Our theme music is by Blue Dot Sessions. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.